Andriy Chikatilo. One day I'm riding the tram, I look, it's number 52. I think, well, I have 52 corpses. Serhiy Tkach. I caught up, grabbed, dragged into the bushes. I had to strangle. I felt such relief, I can't describe it. Anatoliy Onopriyenko. I wanted to show people's helplessness, to make them afraid to go outside. This episode is dedicated to the most terrifying serial maniacs of Ukraine. So, if you're ready, make yourselves comfortable, dear ones, because this is scary. On the hands of Anatoliy Onoprienko is the blood of at least 52 victims, 10 of whom were children. However, he admitted his plans were more ambitious. The beast would kill another 360 people. Fortunately, his arrest stopped him. Anatoliy Onoprienko was born on July 25, 1959 in the village of Lasky in the Zhytomyr region. The boy was the second child in the family. His brother Valentin was 13 years older. Why the family decided to have another child is basically unclear. It would be hard to call these people happy. Among the reasons were aggression, poverty, and alcohol. Onoprienko's father was a former military man. However, the awards he once received for his service did not help the man to build a good life for himself afterwards. He tried to earn extra money as a stoker, a driver, and even tried to find himself in trade. However, it all ended with a criminal record for petty crimes. His wife also had nothing to her name. She tended to the livestock at the collective farm. Eventually, their life descended into quarrels, and the man started turning to the bottle more and more often. As you can guess, the father wasn't kind to the children either. He was always yelling and hitting them. Here's just one example to help you understand the situation. Once, the father, drunk, chased his eldest son, shouting that he would kill him. When the boy hid in the shed, the man started removing the boards one by one to get to him. These were the kinds of amusements in the Onoprienko family.
In 1960, when Anatoliy Onoprienko turned 1 year old, his father left the family for another woman.
And when the child turned 3, his mother died of heart failure.
At first, both sons were taken in by their grandmother, but while the older son, Valentin, soon got married and supported himself, little Tolik still needed to be looked after for more than just a year or two. The boy's behavior left much to be desired. Money was scarce, and the guardian's health was declining. So she decided to send the younger Onoprienko to an orphanage. The father and older son did not object, which deeply hurt Tolik. Later, he would say the following. His brother was around 20 then. His father was around 37 years old. Two young jerks stand there, yelling at me, a little kid with all their might, saying to send me to the orphanage. I remembered those words for the rest of my life. I didn't understand why to the orphanage. I had a father and a brother after all. I ended up in the orphanage and started to cry. And he didn't cry for no reason, because in the orphanage, Onoprienko was bullied and beaten. He was especially hurt by the word bastard. The boy even tried to run away several times, which is understandable, but each time he was brought back to the walls of the orphanage. The orphanage gave me a lot of toughness. Life there was no different from prison or the army. Our orphanage was also fenced, and it was forbidden to go beyond the fence. When I was little, I didn't realize it was a prison. I thought it was a school. There was strictness, and there were a lot of older kids, about 19 years old. What they did to us. Eventually, little Tolik changed and started beating other kids himself. He frequently ran off into the forest to make campfires, an activity he particularly enjoyed for some reason. After 8 years in the orphanage, Onoprienko entered the Malin Forestry College in his native Zhytomyr region. But he didn't really study. Instead, he stole and drank a lot. Eventually, after 2 years, he dropped out and joined the army, and after that, he entered the Odessa Maritime School. This education allowed him to get a good job. I think this moment could have been a turning point in Onoprienko's life. The man became a sailor, enabling him to visit many countries globally. During these years, which was the mid-80s, Anatoly was earning a decent living and was popular among women. At that time, he also became interested in sports, and even though he was only 1.64 meters tall, he stood out among the other men who worked on the liner. By the way, later Onoprienko admitted that during that period, more than one woman became pregnant by him. Despite witnessing the lives of people in Europe and America, Onoprienko never acknowledged any of his children and became distressed. He openly envied their standard of living, displeased that everything in the Soviet Union was significantly inferior. Whether it was because he believed he could somehow change this, or perhaps for some other reasons, But in the 80s, he joined the Communist Party. And this is a really important point that I ask you to remember. After all, this is one of the things he will use to justify some of his actions in the future. Damn communists. If at least 100,000 people watch this video and each donates at least 1 hryvnia to the first-person view drone fundraiser, we will bring our victory closer. My friends are collecting the drones directly, so we will report on every hryvnia in my Telegram channel. Join in with a hryvnia and let's return to the story. In summary, when examining Onoprienko's life until now, it's evident that life was actually favoring him, not just ignoring him. However, it seems he didn't need that. The man got involved in smuggling and started stealing again. Handbags, briefcases, and he also broke into safes in the cabins. Rumor has it that the management caught him smuggling and fired him in 1986. However, while still working on the ship, Onoprienko managed to meet a girl named Irina and even said that he fell in love with her. Irina spoke warmly about Onoprienko when recalling that period.
At 20, I barely got a job as a waitress on the liner. He was 23. Girls would flock around him in groups, but later on, he started looking at me differently. And something changed in our friendly relationship. I didn't believe that someone could fall in love with me, but with him, I blossomed and was very happy.
Irina and Anatoliy's workplace romance eventually led to marriage. Although they didn't officially get married, they just lived together. The couple had a son, and they named him Dmitro. After leaving his job on the liners, Onoprienko worked at the fire department and lived with his family in the village of Mayaki, near the city of Dnipro-Rudne in the Zaporizhia region. The family didn't lack money, and Onoprienko's career was gradually moving upward. He even found himself a new hobby. He bought a hunting rifle and joined the Hunters and Fishermen Society. But the family idyll didn't work out. Onoprienko suddenly left Irina and their little son and moved to Dnipro-Rudne. The woman said it was all because she had let herself go, as if she just didn't attract her husband anymore, and it was only her fault. But whether it was really like that, probably only Onoprienko himself knows for sure. In Dnipro-Rudne, he met Serhiy Rohozin, a former soldier who had served in Afghanistan and was now working on a collective farm. They later claimed to have become friends, but their connection went beyond mere friendship. Criminalists who studied the story of Onoprienko claimed that the man developed a certain psychological dependence on the beast. At first, he respected him, and then he was afraid of him. Rogozin and Onoprienko occasionally sold produce in various parts of Ukraine, transporting the goods by car in boxes. But later, Onoprienko suggested to Rogozin that they could earn some extra cash on the side. He said that cars that stop on the highway at night are easy prey. People at that time are tired and pull over to rest. Doesn't that make them an easy target for robbery? And Rohozin agreed, even though he had a wife and 3 children. The man had no idea how much further than an ordinary robbery Onoprienko would go. On June 14, 1989, Onoprienko and Rohozin were returning from another day of selling cherries. Right in the middle of the road, Anatoly suggested they pull a job, just rob a car. Rohozin supposedly hesitated, but under pressure from Onoprienko, he eventually agreed. On the highway in the Sinelnikivsky district of Dnipropetrovsk region, Onoprienko noticed a Zhiguli with a trailer. The attackers needed it. Onoprienko briefly explained the next steps. He said he would take the shotgun, scare the people inside the car, and take all their valuables for himself. Rogozin was to slowly drive forward and await the signal. As soon as he heard the signal, he was supposed to go back for Onoprienko. That's pretty much what they did. Onoprienko grabbed his shotgun and approached the Zhiguli, which had a man and a woman inside. It was later determined that they were the Melnik couple. They were sleeping when Onoprienko shot the man through the windshield. The wife was abruptly woken up and commanded to exit the car and walk to the forest. She did so, but not quietly. She began to call for help with all her might. Her scream was cut short by a gunshot. Onoprienko shot her without hesitation. Then the attacker acted as if he had done all this before. He took the 2 bodies into the woods, buried them, and concealed them with branches. He looted the Zhiguli of its valuables, drove it to a remote location, doused it with gasoline, and set it ablaze. All of this took only 40 minutes. Rogozin suspected that it wasn't just an ordinary robbery. He even tried to ask his friend what exactly had happened there, but Onoprienko just said it was none of his business. And then they sold what they had stolen. A month later, on July 16th, the criminals went hunting again. Another married couple became their victims. This time, Onoprienko not only burned the car, but also the bodies. His strategy succeeded. The attackers managed to get not only money but also valuable items. Onoprienko suggested to Rogozin that they sell those valuable items later so as not to attract unnecessary attention. That's exactly what they did. On August 16, 1989, Rogozin and Onoprienko set out towards Odessa. Rogozin was sure it was just to sell the stolen goods.
However, on the way, Onoprienko came up with another plan.
At night on a Zaporizhzhia region highway, he spotted a car parked on the roadside in the dark, a new target. Onoprienko took the shotgun, which he hadn't taken out of the car yet, and walked straight toward the vehicle. Inside was a family of 5. Seeing Onoprienko, the father refused to give up easily and tried to fight him.
But if he had any chance in a fistfight, he had none against a shotgun.
Although at first, Onoprienko didn't intend to kill this time, only to rob. At least that's what he said later, but the man's resistance and the presence of 4 witnesses played their part. Onoprienko shot them all, then carried the bodies to a clearing and set them on fire. He suddenly noticed that a child, one of the girls, was still alive. Then the man took out a hunting knife and stabbed her in the back several times. Later, he would describe this act as almost the height of humanity, like he didn't want the girl to burn alive. So he showed mercy. After that, Onoprienko got into the victim's car to drive it as far away as possible and burn it. However, he drew the attention of law enforcement at a state automobile inspectorate checkpoint, prompting officers to tail him. In one version, he escaped from law enforcement. In another, he bribed them and they let him go without further questioning. The beast's victim count rose to 9 with the murdered family, their innocent blood on his hands. But along with this, fear settled inside him. He was afraid that he would be caught either by law enforcement or by someone on the highway, and that they would do to him what he had done to his victims. And finally, in the fall of 1989, Onoprienko decided to run away from the police, from his fear, and to lay low. The man forged fake documents and left for Europe. He mostly lived in Germany, where he worked sometimes as a cook, sometimes as a dishwasher, and sometimes went back to stealing. The whole time he just lived as an illegal immigrant, and in 1994 he was finally deported back to Ukraine.
After returning to his homeland, Anatoliy Onoprienko was detained. At first, it was the police because the man was behaving strangely right in the airport. Some say that he stood on one leg for a long time, others say that he was talking to himself and rambling. The police sent him straight to a psychiatric hospital, where the man spent 3.5 months.
The diagnosis was paranoid schizophrenia.
Whether it was an act or he really had health problems, forensic experts are still debating. But whatever the case, after being discharged, Onoprienko escaped to Germany again.
And he lived there as a vagabond until he was deported again in 1995. Upon his return, he first asked to stay with his older brother and his family in the village of Narodichi. 2 months passed, but Anatoly couldn't or wouldn't find a job. He returned to his old hobby instead. He started stealing and killing again, however, this time without an accomplice. At the end of October, 1995 Onoprienko went to Odessa for a short time, supposedly to make some money on a side job. The side job turned out to be bloody and deadly. That time, he killed an elderly fortune teller right in her house. Of course, he took everything valuable and burned the body as always. After returning to Zhytomyr region, Onoprienko chose not to slow his pace. His new victims were the director of the Malin service station, Oleksandr Svitlovsky, and an employee of the same station, Halina Hrashchenko. Onoprienko shot them on the highway, similar to many of his prior victims. Notably, their relatives were unaware. Nina Onoprienko, the wife of his older brother, said the following.
Anatoly seemed like a cultured, intelligent person. He stayed with us for several days at a time. We had a cat and he adored her, he slept with her. Once we were watching a program about a father who was abusing his daughters. He even said, "How could that be? How is that possible?"
Suddenly, in November 1995, Onoprienko changed his place of residence. Like a bolt from the blue, he showed up at his cousin Petro's place, who lived in Yavoriv, in the Lviv region. Mr. Petro's neighbor, Dmitro, whom he hadn't seen in a decade, remembers those events.
Tolik claimed he owned gas stations in France and Germany.
I had just come back from the Czech Republic and wanted to work for him. He promised to help me get the visa without any issues.
He was a real guy with money.
He wore expensive sportswear, frequented the bar, and treated everyone, but didn't drink himself. He could sit the whole evening with a glass of champagne. However, while Onoprienko managed to impress strangers with these tricks, he couldn't impress his cousin's wife at all. The woman didn't like that their guest was clearly planning to stay for a long time. But what worried her much more was the homemade sawed-off shotgun that Anatoly kept hidden under the bed, which he had made himself from a regular shotgun. After all, a sawed-off shotgun is much easier to carry around. In December of 1995, Onoprienko got another chance at a new life once again. Petro introduced him to Hanna Kozak. The 34-year-old woman worked at a hair salon. They didn't have much money and she had to raise 2 children, a 6-year-old son and a 15-year-old daughter somehow. She got together with Anatoly rather quickly. Just a few days after they met, he had already moved into her apartment. It even seemed that the newly formed couple was having a real idyll. Onoprienko got along very well with his partner's children. The man regularly gave the kids gifts and gladly talked with them. The boy even started calling him dad. Hannah, the woman herself, also received ample attention. Her neighbor recalled that it seemed Hannah had really fallen in love with Anatoly. Although she also assumed that this union was, let's say, motivated by Hannah's desire to escape her poverty. Here's a quote from that same neighbor.
We immediately sensed that she had come into some money. She started buying new things. There was a sparkle in her eyes. She said she was quitting her job and moving abroad. I asked what Tolik did for a living, if he had ever been married. She didn't know anything. She was happy because he gave her flowers and massaged her in the bath. Rumors started that Anka was getting married and that she and Tolik are going to Greece.
But in reality, no one was planning to go to Greece, and all the money Hanna received from Onoprienko was stained with blood, the blood of his victims. On December the 24th, 1995, Onoprienko went for a short trip to the village of Hamarnia in the Malin district of Zhytomyr region. There, he took his usual weapon, entered the Zaichenko family's yard, and fired into the window. The first victim was 27-year-old Vadim Zaichenko. Then Onoprienko opened the door and went inside. 25-year-old Yulia Zaichenko was still alive. She begged him not to kill her, saying she had small children. But the beast didn't care. He didn't shoot her, no. He went to the kitchen, took a knife and stabbed the woman to death. Then he glanced at the child, little Borya, and within seconds, the child was gone. He smothered tiny 3-month-old Ole with a pillow. As always, he set the bodies on fire. Here's what Onoprienko himself recalls about this case. I came to Malin to draw a cross. He referred to a map of Ukraine, with points indicating the murders. He doesn't know why he killed the children. After returning to the Lviv region, the maniac began to terrorize the village of Bratkovichi. On December 31, 1995, the maniac stood on the doorstep of the house where the Kryuchkov family lived. At that time, the parents were visited by their twin daughters who came to spend the holiday together. However, as you can guess, the New Year's night ended tragically for them. Onoprienko first shot the parents and then went after the daughters. One of the sisters tried to hide under the table in the room. She held herself back with all her might so as not to scream. She bit her hand to the bone, trying not to make a sound. However, the maniac still found her. After that, everything happened according to Onoprienko's usual pattern. He walked through the house, took everything valuable, even warm clothes, and of course the jewelry. On the finger of the twins' mother, Onoprienko noticed a gold ring. He couldn't take it off. So he cut off her finger to get what he wanted. In Bratkovichi, the serial killer took the lives of 12 people. In total, from October 1995 to January 1996, 39 people became his victims.
Anatoly Onoprienko committed his last crime on March 22, 1996.
His victims were the residents of a house in Buzg in the Lviv region. The beast arrived there by bus, and he chose the house almost at random. At first glance, it just seemed like a place he could steal a lot from. Inside, there were 4 people, the Novosad couple, the wife's deaf sister, and their little daughter. And this time, Onoprienko was especially cruel. He didn't just shoot his victims. The maniac was saving bullets, so he couldn't kill some of them with a single shot. So he used knives and a dumbbell. On top of everything, he also killed a tiny dog and threw its dead body in the hallway. At this point, Onoprienko had 52 victims. And it's logical to ask, what were law enforcement agencies doing all this time? Why couldn't they catch this person to prevent all these deaths?
The thing is, for a long time, the police didn't see any connection between the attacks at all. Onoprienko operated in the territories of Zaporizhzhia, Zhytomyr and Odessa regions and also visited Dnipropetrovsk. And later Kiev, Rivne and Lviv regions were added. Besides, not all of his attacks were classified properly. For example, the shooting and robbery of people in Zhytomyr region on the highway was classified as destruction of private property because Onoprienko set the car on fire.
Only in January 1996 did the investigation come to the conclusion and recognize that one person could be behind all the murders. This occurred after the tragic incident in Bratkovichi village, Lviv region. The first to realize the connection was Major General of Police Viktor Korol, who was initially assigned by the minister to lead the task force and later the entire headquarters for searching for the maniac. Next, let's listen to the recollections of Mr. Korol himself.
When the crime in Bratkovichi became known, I asked the minister for permission to go to the scene personally.
I left Kiev through Zhytomyr region. That's when the thought of some kind of connection first crossed my mind. In both instances, shooting and arson occurred with savage brutality. The perpetrator was unknown at the time, but the way they shot, where they stood, and some other details were very similar. There was no reason to officially combine the cases immediately, but intuition had already surfaced.
Then, law enforcement began to develop the theory about a serial killer traveling around Ukraine. The police officers gathered data from all regions. They began working on what is called the criminal's modus operandi. They found out that he acted alone. In 2 places, they found footprints from men's Kraus brand shoes. There were usually no fingerprints. The suspect used a 12-gauge weapon. They also found 2 witnesses, one in the Zaporizhzhia region and another in the Lviv region. It's true, they didn't provide many details, but even with these small details, it was possible to create a visual description. The police report at that time sounded as follows.
Young, height approximately 160 to 165 centimeters, of average build, wears size 41 shoes by Krause, may have a decent appearance since he wears expensive shoes and does not arouse suspicion among others.
Investigators also suggested that the maniac is mentally ill.
And about every 10 days, he becomes more aggressive and goes out hunting again.
It seems that law enforcement was doing everything possible, but in reality, they were making one mistake after another. People from different teams were working on the case, and a centralized headquarters was only created in March of '96 when the Minister of Internal Affairs intervened. As a result of this case, 60 people were removed from their positions and dismissed from law enforcement. Lack of experience, fear of taking responsibility, and official negligence led to the fact that Onoprienko was caught by accident. He was arrested in Yavoriv in the apartment of his partner Hanna Kozak. According to one version, Hannah turned him in when she grew suspicious. However, other versions exist. Well, for example, that he was turned in by his cousin Petro. In any case, the police officers came to the apartment. Onoprienko himself opened the door in just his underwear, and he was arrested. By the way, they found quite a few items in the apartment that were being searched for. In particular, a tape recorder. During the pre-trial investigation and at the trial itself, Onoprienko calmly talked about what he had done. Ruslan Sushko, who was still a police officer at the time and personally spoke with Onoprienko, said,
He spoke extensively about himself, portraying himself as a communication monster with everything being obvious and immediately apparent. Absolutely not. Absolutely, if we didn't know who he was. Outwardly in communication and in the way he spoke. Just an ordinary person, average as always, an average person in everything. His story is very similar to the stories of other serial killers, maniacs. That is, it's like an irresistible desire to kill, that it's something he just has to do, to kill.
It was never really possible to find out exactly why Anatoliy Onoprienko started killing.
I don't know why me. Why did I kill 52? It's not like I killed someone once, didn't like it, but still killed. Or like I had something against someone, or was angry and killed. It's nothing. 52 people were killed. I didn't even know these people at all. I'm just an ordinary person, not a superman or a maniac. I don't have any of those qualities. I said during the investigation that yes, I did. During the investigation, when it was going on, I said I killed people with the intention of robbing them. No, I didn't kill with the intention of robbing. How could they come up with murder out of nothing? The murders happened in a cunning way. 9 murders were committed in the Union and another 9 murders. And I went abroad. I lived abroad with 9 murders. The Mormons baptized me abroad. It's an American faith. The CIA interrogated me, the international police. And after 9 murders, another 40 murders.
The maniac himself explained his actions to outsiders, or rather, to supernatural influence. He said that he heard certain voices telling him what to do. These higher powers supposedly ordered him to carry out 3 series of murders. The first, 9 people for the dying communism. Fucking commies. The second, 40 people against neo-nationalism. And the third series of victims was supposed to protect humanity from the plague of the 21st century. But what stopped Onopriienko from doing this was that he got caught. According to him, he was supposed to kill another 360 people. After analyzing Onoprienko's condition, doctors determined he had schizophrenia. However, the maniac was found sane because at the time of the attacks, he was fully aware of what he was doing and later could recall all of it in detail. And even to this day, criminologists and psychiatrists cannot determine the exact diagnosis. Some people think that Onoprienko is just a very good actor. Onoprienko's words in court. I have never regretted anything. I don't regret it now either. The Onoprienko case took up 99 volumes. The trial began in November 1998. With short breaks, it lasted for 4 months. The judge spent 4 weeks without a break preparing the verdict, which took 12 hours to read out. On April 1st, 1999, the court sentenced him to death by shooting. But that didn't happen. You see, in 2000, Ukraine introduced a moratorium on the death penalty, so from then on, Onoprienko became just a life prisoner. He was put in solitary confinement in Zhytomyr prison number 8. The head of the life sentence sector, Volodymyr Antonyuk, described the beast as a specific type of convict who doesn't get along with anyone. So, apparently he was put in a separate cell not as a punishment, but for safety reasons. He behaved calmly. He read every book in the prison library and never refused newspapers, but requested the removal of the television from his cell. Supposedly because of poor eyesight, but according to the prison staff, there were also some rather strange moments. Here's a quote.
He talks to himself. He has moments like that. Other than that, he behaves very well and calmly. There are no complaints about him.
Anatoliy refused to work while imprisoned. He only consumed prison food and received no visitors or phone calls. And he actually felt fine in this isolation. But when journalists came to see him in 2013, he was genuinely happy and willingly told them everything they wanted to hear. He kept rambling again about this supernatural influence.
When this comes over me, I act. There's an abnormal state. It's not my own state, not a human one. When it passes, I feel human again, like a person. There may have been influences on me, but I'm still unsure what they were. They have some kind of cunning influences. There are quite a few different forces on Earth, maybe not just in space, that can influence a person. I know that I would never do that myself. Maybe they want to run some more experiments on me. Maybe they put me to sleep somehow. Maybe they drug me with something, with drugs, so that I say something that's not human. And to find this out, maybe they'll shock me with electricity somehow, with electroshock.
In 2016, Onoprienko could have had the right to ask the president for a pardon. But he insisted that he wouldn't do it, because he said he realized his guilt and didn't want to be released.
I will ask for a pardon. I'm a murderer. Whether I want it or not, I'm a murderer. I know it's wrong. With my extensive murder record, I don't seek a pardon. Execution might be best for me. The death penalty would be preferable. Well, I'm sick in prison now. I don't want to die right now. It's important for me to find out, after sitting here for so long, why this happened, how it happened. Maybe someday this will be known, not for freedom, but just to know the truth. But I admit that it might be somehow, well, maybe it's my fate that I keep repeating the same thing over and over again. Fate repeats itself. I wouldn't want to have this again in my next life, or to go through something like murder again. Of course, I regret it. I'm more than 100% sure that I regret it, because it's impossible to do something like that. It's impossible to do something like that.
Anatoliy Onoprienko died in prison on August 27, 2013 from heart failure. His relatives refused to claim his body, so he was buried at the state's expense. No one knows where. The next anti-hero who swept through Ukraine like a deadly whirlwind was Serhiy Tkach. He is generally known as the Pavlohrad or Pology maniac. Although Tkach is considered a Ukrainian serial killer, it's important to note that he is ethnically Russian. He came to Ukraine from Russia and started killing here. Serhiy Tkach was born in 1952 in the city of Kiselevsk, Kemerovo region. This territory in western Siberia, far from Ukraine, is where he had a typical childhood. However, just like the childhood stories of most maniacs, many maniacs have their own traumatic experience, some kind of psychological trauma that, when ignored in childhood by both the person and their environment, and sometimes even provoked or caused by that very environment, eventually turns into a disorder dangerous to society. I can't say for sure that people like Chikatilo, Onopriyenko, or Tkach wouldn't have become killers if they had turned to a mental health specialist in time. And would they have even turned to one in the first place, even if they had the opportunity back then? But from my own experience, I want to emphasize once again that even just an honest conversation with a therapist can change your life for the better. I myself have turned to a therapist more than once, and it helped me get through the most difficult periods in my life. Cancer, metastases, war, divorce. Who knows where I'd be without help, as I've said before. Right now, I'm talking primarily about mental help. There are a lot of things that you just can't tell anyone. Sometimes it's even hard to admit to yourself that you have some problems. And in this, I think a therapist will definitely help you. Well, I'm just sharing my own experience. Don't be afraid to ask for help if you feel you need it. Going to a therapist won't make you crazy, quite the opposite. If your teeth hurt, you go to the dentist. You don't try to handle it yourself. It's normal. Tkach was an ordinary kid in an ordinary family without any special prospects in life. His father worked at the mine. As a child, Tkach was frequently ill, thin, and frail, making him a target for mockery. Besides, he was born the fourth child in the family, so he didn't expect any special treatment. More likely to get yelled at, shoved, or beaten. Tkach tried to deal with his childhood problems in a pretty ordinary way too. He chose weightlifting. He became a junior champion and planned to enroll in the Omsk Institute of Physical Culture. But fate played a cruel joke on Serhiy. He got injured quite seriously and the path to sports was closed. Tkach was deployed to serve in the remote Tixi Bay, Yakutia, far from civilization. Tkach became fascinated by the sea, so much that he decided to apply to the Sevastopol Naval School. He passed the exams, but his health failed him. Heart problems were discovered during the medical exam. They say he was so upset that he even tried to take his own life. But unfortunately, he didn't succeed. Instead, the man took up another activity, something sadistic. He stayed in the village of Tixi, where he joined a team that caught dogs. And while others shot the animals with service weapons, Tkach used a metal rod. And he got particular satisfaction when he skinned the dogs. He sold the skins for good money to those who made warm clothes from them. In this, let's say, position, Tkach worked to earn some extra money and save up so he could return to Kiselovsk. After saving up the necessary amount, he returned home. He didn't stay unemployed for long. He got a job with the Kemerovo police. Initially, he worked as a criminal investigation inspector before becoming a forensic expert. He even enrolled in the correspondence department of the Novosibirsk police school. However, that plan failed. Tkach advanced rapidly in his career, seemingly with good reason. After all, in 1979, he was fired for falsifying documents. Here's a quote from Tkach himself.
And I got an article for discrediting the bodies of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. They fired me and that's it. Without the right to finish higher education or join the party. That was, as they say, the end, the sunset of my life.
Tkach got a job at the railroad and started drinking heavily. He was proud of his records in this field even decades later.
A bottle of Siberian vodka for $7.50. From the barrel, yes, 13 seconds. Many have tried. 18 is the maximum. I'm telling you, but you forgot to stir it up, to raise a whirl, yes, to lift it from the bottom.
Back in Kiselevsk, Tkach got married and the couple even had 2 sons. But as you might guess, family happiness was not happiness at all. The couple was constantly arguing. According to a popular media version, Tkach's wife ran away from him one day. According to another version, which Tkach himself mentioned, his wife cheated on him and he caught her with her lover in the act. He threw the man down from the 2nd floor, causing the family to break up. Whether the first version is true, or the second, or maybe there's even a third one, it doesn't really matter, because the key point here is something else. In the 1980s, Tkach moved to Crimea. And whatever happened with his wife the day before, that's when he committed his first serious crime. He drank 2 bottles of wine and attacked a girl in Simferopol. He raped and killed her. But unlike many other criminals, Tkach decided to confess to what he had done right away. He walked up to a payphone, dialed the police number, and directly said that he had taken a person's life. He supposedly did this to help his colleagues find the body. But the officer on duty didn't give his name, which Tkach didn't like. He hung up, and that was it. They didn't find him, and accordingly they didn't find the killer either. For a while, the criminal lay low. He didn't want to stay in Crimea any longer, so he moved to Pavlohrad in the Dnipropetrovsk region. He started a new family there, getting married and having a daughter. Everything seemed fine for a while. But that feeling, what Tkach felt after taking a person's life, he couldn't forget it. After all, for him, it was pure pleasure. His urge to kill became all-consuming. A schoolgirl was his first victim. 10-year-old Olya Dmytrenko was on her way to music school on October 31, 1984. She was carrying a bag in her hands, and inside it were various stationery items. She needed them for her lesson. Tkach called the child over to him, and during the conversation asked her to walk away with him, away from prying eyes. Then he dragged Olya to an abandoned factory. There he strangled and raped her. This time, Tkach also took a souvenir with him, a music notebook belonging to the girl, and also her wristwatch. This became, let's say, the maniac's signature, because later on, he would always take some kind of souvenir from his victims. The next target of Tkach was 8-year-old Olya Shuvalova. The second grader was on her way home from school, and witnesses even claimed to have seen the girl approaching the entrance to her building. However, Olya never appeared at the door of the apartment where she lived. Tkach intercepted her right near the entrance, caught her attention with something, and then dragged her into the basement, where, as usual, he strangled and sexually abused her. Tkach's victims continued to be mostly little girls and teenagers. Why?
Well, Tkach himself answered this question.
Why were you specifically interested in children? Is it physically easier to handle them than women?
Many people ask similar questions, but whatever I came across, that's what I did, that's all. It was a kind of sadistic game on my part, a game with the devil.
The police, of course, tried to catch the criminal. However, there was no evidence, no direct traces that would indicate that it was Tkach who did it. He always used a condom. He also always took away from the crime scene any items that could have his fingerprints on them. On top of everything, he experimented with his appearance. He could grow his hair out or he could shave it off. Sometimes he even wore wigs.
He experimented with his beard and mustache as well.
Later, Tkach boasted that, well, it wasn't for nothing that he was a forensic expert. I once had top-secret level 4 clearance with access to murder case files. I studied them extensively, learning investigation methods and key focus areas.
It's hard to say how true that is, because on one hand, Tkach really couldn't be caught for decades. But on the other hand, it seemed like that wasn't even the goal in the first place. In the places where Tkach operated, innocent people were arrested just to close the murder cases as quickly as possible. Witness testimonies were often ignored because they simply didn't know what to do with them next. Instead, they looked for someone weak, someone gullible, someone who seemed suspicious to forcefully make that person sign a confession.
But the maniac, feeling unpunished, began to act much more actively. In the spring of 1985, the body of his 20-year-old victim was found. In 1987, the serial killer attacked 11-year-old Valya Osina, then a 17-year-old resident of Pavlohrad. In June 1988, the brute killed a 12-year-old girl, and in April 1989, two 15-year-olds. By that time, Serhiy Tkach had already developed his own system of attacks. Before going out to commit a crime, he always drank alcohol. Then he would get on his bicycle and ride around provincial towns, mostly when it was getting dark. He approached his victims kindly and carefully so as not to scare them away, because he always saved the worst for later. By the way, in the podcast where I read scary stories from your lives, one girl said that she saw Tkach with her own eyes. The link to the podcast is right here, just in case. In July 1989, Olia Svitlishna passed away. Her parents sent the girl to the store for bread, as they were getting ready to celebrate her sister's birthday. 8-year-old Olia got on her bicycle, and no one ever saw her alive again. Her body was found a few hours later, 300 meters from the house. The girl's father was imprisoned for her murder after his own mother implicated him during the investigation. The man couldn't take it and hanged himself, never living to see the official results of the investigation when it became known that Tkach was the one who did it.
Actually, both the maniac and the law enforcement officers of that time had their own signature style. While the maniac was taking the lives of young girls and children, the law enforcement officers were imprisoning innocent people one after another. You can learn more about how the investigation worked back then and what happened to the wrongfully convicted in the video on my channel Pokey Kid Spit. Watch and subscribe.
In Pavlohrad and the nearby towns and villages, Tkach took the lives of dozens of victims. He operated there from 1984 to 1999. In the early 2000s, residents of Zaporizhzhia region endured suffering and fear. At that time, Tkach's wife got a promotion at work. She was appointed deputy director at a factory in the city of Polohi. It's an ordinary small town where nothing much ever happens. Tkach, of course, appreciated this and moved after his wife.
Beautiful places, peaceful, a measured life, everything is green. Except for the fact that from 2001 to 2005, many serious sex crimes were committed here. Underage girls and young women were raped and murdered.
Although right after Tkach moved to the new city with his family, nothing happened there at first, because the maniac temporarily put his criminal activity, well, sort of on pause. And in general, he started actively establishing contacts with the locals. Tkach was an effective communicator who seemed good-natured and kind.
Well, for example, you need to go to work because your colleague can't come in due to some of his own problems.
Tkach can easily cover for him. If he hears an unfunny joke from a friend, it's no sin to laugh. If something bad happened, call Tkach and he would help. Everyone in the new city knew that. So, when girls started disappearing in the town, no one could even suspect Tkach because he was considered one of their own.
Uncle Seryoja, that's what 9-year-old Yana Popovich called the maniac. Tkach was a frequent guest in this family. When he visited, he would bring a bottle for the table and gifts for the little girl. On September 23, 2002, Yana disappeared. The girl was walking home along her usual route through the brick factory. However, she never made it to her own yard that day. Yana Popovich's body was found the next day in the reeds. Tkach pretended to be very upset and tried to comfort the family. However, at that time, 14-year-old Yasha Popovich was taken to the police station. Yana was his cousin's niece. Yasha was imprisoned and Tkach continued to kill.
Soon, with a 9th grade girl who was returning from a computer club, he finished her off right near an apartment building and covered the body with an iron sheet. And he left. He strangled another 13-year-old girl with the straps of her own backpack, raped her, and dumped the body in a local grove. Tkach always strangled his victims first, and only then committed sexual assault. He believed it was safer that way for him. A year after Yana's murder, the horror in Polohi was still ongoing. It's understandable why parents were afraid for their children, even in kindergartens. Here's what one of the teachers from that time remembers.
People were scared. They told us to keep the gate closed so that no one would leave the group. At that time, we were even instructed not to go outside and to open the door only for people we knew.
In the summer of 2005, Tkach attacked 18-year-old Olha Topolova, who was working in the garden. He acted according to his old scheme, but he miscalculated. Tkach was certain he had left only the girl's body at the crime scene after checking her pulse. However, she survived. She was found by locals and taken to the hospital, where law enforcement officers soon came to her.
I remember tying the hose to my bicycle, and I remember that suddenly I couldn't breathe. I regained consciousness 3 hours later, with torn clothes, underwear over my eyes, and sweater pulled up.
Based on the victim's words, they made a composite sketch, but there weren't many details. Not a young man with a mustache, of average height, that's all. While the police were questioning all the local men with mustaches, Tkach kept on killing.
In mid-July, a 12-year-old girl went missing. At the start of August, her body was discovered in a vacant lot.
And a day later, the body of 9-year-old schoolgirl Katerina Karudzia was pulled from the water. She became the last victim of this monster. On the day of the tragedy, the girl was swimming with her friends in a pond near her house and sunbathing on the shore. Tkach noticed the children and went to swim with them. When the girl Katerina disappeared, the other children remembered that they had seen some old man next to her. One local resident had also seen this old man shortly before that, so he reported it to the police. In August 2005, Serhiy Tkach was arrested in his own house on the outskirts of the city of Pology. He greeted the officers with words that probably became some of the most popular in Ukrainian true crime, so to speak. "I've been waiting for you for 25 years. A search was conducted in the apartment at that time, and dozens of items were found that later became evidence in the case. The items found were children's notebooks, jewelry, lipsticks, and handbags, according to Tkach, regarding the attack on Katerinka. Of course, I saw that there were people all around the pond, and what made me kill the girl, I don't know. I just don't know. I dragged her under a bush and drowned her there. A beast. There are none like that in nature. That's how I can describe myself." During the investigation, Tkach actively confessed to his crimes. He stated that he had taken the lives of more than 100 victims, describing in detail where, how, and when it happened. The only thing he couldn't remember was what they looked like.
Right from consciousness, it erases everything. That's all. Not a single nightmare.
But despite Tkach's own confessions, in some cases it was impossible to identify the locations of the bodies, the victims. It was also impossible to establish his involvement in the murders. Let me remind you that a quarter of a century had passed since his first murders. Obviously, it wasn't that easy. The investigators compared the confessions written by Tkach with the unsolved criminal cases that were kept in the archive. It turned out that in many cases, investigations were not even initiated at all, which once again shows the poor work of law enforcement agencies. Serhiy Tkach's trial took nearly a year, with the case materials spanning 105 volumes. He was found sane. In the psychiatrist's conclusion, it was stated that Serhiy Tkach did not require the application of compulsory medical measures. He has such individual psychological traits as pronounced egocentrism, emotional coldness, sensitivity, vindictiveness, and an inability to form lasting warm relationships, as well as increased malice, irritability, and aggression. Many people believe that the serial killer committed all his crimes only for the sake of fame. Tkach himself said that in this way he wanted to take revenge on the law enforcement officers who once fired him. He believed it was unjustified. "I wanted to finally show the Ministry of Internal Affairs that they don't know how to do their job. All they can do is drink vodka and arrest drunks." Instead, at the time, Dnipropetrovsk's special investigator for particularly important cases, who was part of the group investigating Tkach's crimes, Valery Mirhorodsky, noted that the likely cause of the crimes was drinking. The psychiatric evaluation found him sane. It's hard to say what happens to him after he drinks a bottle of vodka, since the experts didn't give him any. We also, before establishing the circumstances of the crime, "Did you drink?" We didn't offer him a glass. His atrocities might be due to vodka, which he admitted mixing with Demidrol. He said it gives a better kick. Whatever Serhiy Tkach's motives were, fortunately he was sentenced to life imprisonment in December 2008. In his final statement, the bloody serial killer said he had committed too great a mortal sin and asked to be treated according to the law. He called himself a beast, and for a beast, a cage is the ultimate punishment. Almost no one came to hear the serial killer's final statement. The only thing I ask is for my fellow judges to be objective on this matter. Not only towards me, but also towards the people in the Ministry of Internal Affairs and the prosecutor's office, who were willing participants in my criminal activities for decades. Serhiy Tkach was sent to Zhytomyr Correctional Facility No. 8 to serve his sentence. He was held, by the way, in the same cell as the maniac Onopriyenko, back in the day. Tkach felt at ease in his cell. His conscience and appetite remained unaffected. Moreover, he even managed to get married and have another child while already behind bars. You might wonder who could marry him, but it's not surprising when you learn it was Olena Bolkina, a Russian woman. She's 38 years younger than him. They corresponded for half a year, and during their very first meeting in prison, Tkach proposed marriage. By their third meeting, the woman became pregnant, and in 2016 she gave birth to a girl named Yelizaveta. However, the family idyll did not last long, as Serhiy Tkach died of a heart attack on November 4, 2018.
And what's there?
For some reason, his wife did not come for her husband's body, so he was buried by the prison staff. Officially, Tkach is believed to have killed 37 people, but unofficially, that number exceeds 100. Serhiy Tkach and Anatoliy Onoprienko are called two of the three most terrifying serial maniacs in Ukraine, but they fall short compared to the one who leads this trio. It would be wrong to ignore the attention and the tragic leader of this list.
This is the one whose name has become synonymous with the word maniac in our region, Andriy Chikatilo.
He is also called Satan, the Mad Beast, or the Red Beast, and dear ones, not without reason. Andriy Chikatilo was born in the village of Yabluchne in the Sumy region. The future monster first saw the world on October 16, 1936, that is, back in the days of the Soviet Union. This was obviously not the best time to be born. The Holodomor had just passed, and soon everyone would face World War II. Chikatilo's parents were ordinary workers. Life was challenging, especially after his father left for war. His mother could barely get a piece of bread while working on the collective farm, let alone anything more.
Chikatilo himself never said anything bad about his mother. However, he didn't say anything good either.
Researchers of his family suggested that the boy's mother treated him coldly. She showed little interest in the child and never said words like, "I love you," but she could easily yell at him or punish him. The poor family faced even more problems when, in 1943, Chikatilo's sister, Tetiana, was born. It's still unknown who Andriy's mother gave birth to his sister with. It is assumed that his mother was a victim of abuse by the German occupiers. There is no documented evidence of this. But this was the Soviet Union. They confirmed whatever they wanted. In September 1944, Andriy Chikatilo started first grade. As he himself said at the time, he was hungry and ragged. At school, I would faint from hunger and fall under the desk. I wore rags. I was the subject of ridicule and couldn't defend myself. I was too shy. Without ink, I would just sit at my desk and cry. The students sometimes told the teacher, which surprised her. What, Andriy doesn't have a tongue? If I needed to go to the bathroom, I was afraid to ask for permission. The last thing was especially traumatic for the boy, because until he was 12 years old, he had urinary incontinence.
For this, his own mother often beat him.
Obviously, this didn't make him any more confident at school.
They told me that everything about me was already programmed since childhood. That was my fate, and that's it. If the doctors had told me that you were already twisted since childhood.
On top of everything, the boy was also inattentive and had poor eyesight. All my life, I was humiliated and trampled on. I was in despair. I have no character. I couldn't defend myself from the boys. They beat me because of my clumsiness and slowness. They called me a klutz, a wimp, a sissy. I couldn't fight back. The resentment choked me my whole life. I was even ashamed of being born. The boy dreamed above all that his father would come back from the war as soon as possible. He thought that they were alike and that he would finally have someone to rely on. However, when his father returned from the army in 1949, the situation didn't really improve. The man returned from not only the war but also captivity. The Soviet authorities branded him a traitor because they believed he might have collaborated with the Germans or the Americans. So there was no hope for a normal job. On top of that, the man fell ill with tuberculosis. Eventually, young Andriy almost stopped leaving the house and began to study intensively. He believed that only this way would he have a chance for a future. But studying is studying, shyness is shyness, and sexual desire is sexual desire. It didn't go anywhere.
We were raised to believe that all this sex is harmful, that you should only work in production and build communism, and that all this is unnecessary, that it's all superfluous.
I was convinced that all this was unnecessary. If I couldn't get an erection, I didn't worry about it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't matter. But it weighs on your mind, it really does. Well, that's how it is for me.
This made Chikatilo's teenage years particularly challenging. His first love was a beautiful girl named Lilia Barisheva. According to him, everyone liked her, but she didn't care about him, since he was always in rags, skinny, and quiet. This really hurt the boy. He said he dreamed of a great love like the ones he read about in books, but this was nothing like that. And one day, Chikatilo couldn't control his animal instincts.
In 1954, at the age of 18, Chikatilo attacked his 13-year-old younger sister's friend.
At that time, his parents and sister had gone to visit relatives, and the friend who didn't know about it came to ask Tatiana to go for a walk. Realizing that no one was around, Chikatilo attacked the girl, threw her to the ground, and began to imitate sexual intercourse, right in their clothes. The girl struggled, but it was in vain. Chikatilo recalled that at that time he experienced his first orgasm in his life, while still in his clothes. No one told anyone about this. Not the little girl, not Chikatilo's sister, and of course, not Chikatilo himself. At that moment, Andrei Chikatilo became convinced of his own kind of uniqueness. Despite his insecurities and life troubles, he nearly graduated as an honors student. While the rest of his classmates were either loafing around or working on the collective farm like their parents, Andrei believed that he had every chance to become a lawyer.
In addition, he had some political ambitions.
All the time, I had all these Politburo members. I would appoint them, I would remove them.
In all the foreign countries, I knew everyone. Gomulka, Kadar, Vilvulbekt, everyone, even Piek, I knew them all. Back in 9th grade, when Stalin died, I was already ready to accept all of this from Stalin, the inheritance to be the general secretary of this party, of the world communist movement.
So Chikatilo packed his things and went to Moscow, where he hoped to enter Moscow University. He lived and studied for his exams at the train station, but Chikatilo failed despite his efforts. He himself said that he did much better than the others, but supposedly he was rejected because of his father being a traitor. That could very well be true. Whether it was or not, we can hardly say for sure. However, one thing is obvious. Chikatilo could put an end to his career, which, apart from dreams, had little to support it. After failing his exams, Chikatilo went to the Oktyrka Technical School of Communications, and after graduating, he went to work in the Northern Urals at a line technical communication center. He had an unsuccessful sexual encounter in the Urals. A woman, 7 years older than Chikatilo, approached him, and things started to develop, but when it came to sex, Chikatilo couldn't perform. At least not the first few times.
I embarrassed myself in front of the whole village. Sex, jokes, everyone meets up, they tell stories like, I slept with her, and then there's you.
I say, what about me? I didn't sleep with anyone, even though I'm a man.
It really hit his self-esteem, and he even started to think that something was wrong with him. Which, as we know, was basically true. After working in the Urals, Chikatilo's life included studying by correspondence at the Moscow Electromechanical Institute of Railway Engineers and serving in the army. Eventually, in 1960, he moved to Rodionovo-Nezvetaisk near Rostov-on-Don. There, he got a job as an engineer at a telephone station. And 2 years later, his sister introduced him to a girl named Faina, whom he married in 1964. Obviously, the woman noticed that their sex life, let's say, was far from passionate.
You can't get it up, you're trying to force it in with your fists, it's supposed to stand up on its own.
Faina was understanding. As they say, he doesn't beat her, doesn't drink, and works, so let it be.
Well, she didn't make fun of me, she cried into my ear next to me too. I cried and she cried. At night she would turn away from me. And, you know, all the guys, I think, laugh and say, you're a woman, and I still don't know where.
Despite the fact that the couple practically had no sex, they somehow managed to have 2 children. A year after the wedding, their daughter Lyudmila was born, and 4 years later, their son Yuri. He also ended up in prison as an adult, but for theft, not murder. During this period, Chikatilo decided to find himself in a new field and aimed for teaching and education. To do this, he received a philological education specializing in Russian language and literature, and also graduated from a pedagogical institute with a course in Marxism, Leninism, and literature. Chikatilo later became a Russian language teacher and an educator at boarding school number 30 in Novoshakhtinsk. And there, apparently relying on the strict principles of Marxism, Leninism, he began to harass his female students. That is, children. Back then, it even came to light. 2 girls in 1974 openly reported the harassment to the administration. Andriy Romanovich, as Chikatilo was addressed at the educational institution back then, was forced to write a resignation letter. Chikatilo later voluntarily recalled the situation this way. She, the student, resisted, pushed me away and screamed. When she started screaming, I left her alone. The director of the boarding school found out about this incident, and I had to leave that job.
I had no other thoughts except to commit lewd acts towards the student and to get sexual satisfaction from it.
Well, what can I say? Person of the year. He worked as a vocational training instructor, later becoming a supervisor at another vocational school. The students who studied at that vocational school and lived in the dormitory complained that Chikatilo would get under the blanket with them. But Andrei Chikatilo got away with it even then. Psychiatrist Dmitro Veltishchev, who studied Chikatilo's case, said his sexual orientation changed while working as a teacher and educator. Ordinary sexual contacts did not bring him satisfaction, but those in which the partners screamed and resisted did, very much so. Ambivalence of sexuality manifested itself. Desire, love, and hate, the urge to humiliate and cause pain, determined the further development of sadism, said psychiatrist Dmitro Veltishchev. Finally, in 1978, Andrei decided not to limit himself to just harassment. When Chikatilo was 42, he killed for the first time. The victim was a 9-year-old girl. Quote from Chikatilo: "It was a girl in a red dress. I killed her, cut her, abused her, and threw her into the river." However, that's rather dry and doesn't describe the horrifying reality that happened that day. The 9-year-old girl in the red dress was a second grader, Olena Zakotnova, who was returning home from her friend's house that day. Chikatilo hunted her down near the Hrushevka River. To be precise, he didn't use the word hunted. He said he just wanted to meet the girl. He promised her some chewing gum. A poor family, Soviet times, such a treasure was something you could only dream of. And the little girl agreed. After reaching a place that seemed safe to Chikatilo, he began to undress 9-year-old Olena. But she got scared and screamed. Chikatilo was frightened too. What if someone heard or saw them? So he strangled the child while assaulting her, but even that wasn't enough for him. Eventually, he started stabbing her with a knife. From the victim's suffering, Andrei Chikatilo experienced orgasm. He dressed the second-grade girl's body and simply threw it into the river. Then he went home.
After all the manipulations with the body, he brought her here to this very place. And here he dumped the body, right in these reeds. The briefcase and the clothes. 2 days later, the body of Lena Zakotnova was found 150 meters from here in this direction near the bridge.
What happened shocked Chikatilo. He couldn't explain to himself what it was, what he felt, or why he did it. He also feared the police would come and arrest him. As a result, he did nothing else for the following 3 years. Meanwhile, another man was wrongfully convicted and executed for the girl's murder. An innocent man. Chikatilo went hunting again in 1981. On September 3rd that year, Larissa Tkachenko, 17, was searching for new clients. She was called an underage prostitute, and unfortunately, that day among her clients was Andrei Chikatilo. The man took the girl to a forest strip away from prying eyes and tried to use her services, but it didn't work out. There was no erection. He couldn't get aroused unless he heard screams, suffering, and caused pain. This made the girl laugh, and she started mocking Chikatilo. What happened next? A quote from the criminal case. Larissa tried to push the man off her. Her hair was covered in dirt and branches. Her clothes were aggressively torn to shreds. Chikatilo started beating the girl with his hands, shoving dirt into her mouth so she wouldn't scream. After Larissa lost consciousness, Chikatilo bit off her nipple. He stabbed her and strangled her. The next day, Larissa's body was found in a forest strip on the left bank of the Don River. Chikatilo took her clothes with him. Later, he would say that he scattered the clothes in different places simply because it gave him pleasure. The police once again failed to track him down. Probably realizing his impunity and also understanding what exactly gave him sexual pleasure, Chikatilo began to kill on a much larger scale. On June 27, 1982, in the forest belt near the village of Donsky, the body of 13-year-old Lyuba Bryuk was found. 3 months later, in the city of Shakhty, 19-year-old Irina Korobelnikova was found. On April 10, 1983, in Novoshakhtinsk, the body of 9-year-old Olya Stamoshonok was found. And in August of the same year, 13-year-old Ira Donikova, she studied at a boarding school for children with intellectual disabilities. Just 20 days later, the body of 7-year-old Igor Gudkov was found nearby. The investigators, of course, and the residents were frightened and shocked by the brutality with which the attacker dealt with his victims. There were numerous stab wounds on the bodies. The maniac often stabbed the same spot several times and twisted the knife inside. The victims were found either with their eyes gouged out or with their eyes tied shut. They showed signs of strangulation, and many were missing ears, tongues, breasts, or genitals. Their serial killer either cut them off or bit them off. At first, Andriy Chikatilo operated mainly in the Rostov region, where he lived. But soon his geography, so to speak, expanded. Tashkent, St. Petersburg, Moscow, and sadly Zaporizhzhia were added.
The fact that the killer expanded the boundaries of his attacks is related to several factors. First of all, he changed his place of residence and his job. He moved to Novocherkassk and got a job at a local factory as a supply specialist. Secondly, he often went on business trips, and together with Chikatilo, death came to the places he visited on those trips. However, the most important thing is that he didn't move to the new city for no reason.
In the fall of 1984, Andriy Chikatilo was detained by the police. Once, because he tried to meet a girl at the Central Market but behaved quite aggressively, following her and trying to grab her by the hands. Another time when Chikatilo decided to use the services of a prostitute right at the bus station. Maybe his bus was delayed or something, I don't know. The district officer, displeased, took him to the police station where they drew his blood for testing. And later, these DNA results were even compared with the DNA results found on the bodies of some of the victims. However, no matches were found. Why is that? That's a separate story, which I'll talk about a bit later. The key point is that Chikatilo was released. The only punishment for him was that he was no longer a member of the Communist Party. During a business trip to Tashkent, Chikatilo killed a 12-year-old girl and a woman. Next is a quote from Chikatilo himself.
But that's all, everyone in a row. I didn't choose, I didn't look for anyone. According to the script, I acted it out as I acted it out, but how it really was, how to say, they tormented me so much that I don't even know to whom or how to answer anymore.
It was different. Sometimes there were drifters. I was the commander of the group at the station. I slept at the station on the floor. I'd lay out newspapers, not right on the bare floor. I'd lay out newspapers. I had newspapers with me.
On the newspapers, really. I'd lay them out and sleep on the newspapers.
Well, and we got acquainted nearby, and we would go into the forest strip. We would leave, and that's it, fellow travelers, so to speak, by misfortune.
And then, you know, she would start shaking me, saying, "What's wrong with you? You walked 3 kilometers, you don't have a car, you didn't bring one, and your little car doesn't work." And that's it. She starts laughing. All of this, of course, really got on my nerves.
I thought, why did they call me into their lives, dragged me through the mud as a person, shamed me, and then, of course, I started to vent my frustration.
I would tear everything up without looking.
The judge wrote that all of this was done for the purpose of obtaining sexual gratification.
Although during his trip to Zaporizhzhia, he specifically went to the outskirts of the city in search of a victim. And unfortunately, he did find one. In the Ukrainian city, the maniac encountered 12-year-old Vanya Bilovetsky. Chikatilo approached a boy sitting near the forest belt, smoking. He told the boy that smoking is harmful to his health. Vanya got up and walked away, not wanting to continue the conversation. Chikatilo then grabbed a stone from the road. He followed the boy and hit him on the head 3 times. When the child lost consciousness, the maniac stuffed his mouth with dirt so he wouldn't scream if he woke up. Then he tore off his clothes and tried to rape him. However, he couldn't do it. Then Chikatilo, lying on top of Vanya, took out a knife and started stabbing him in the throat. And that's when he had an orgasm. But even that wasn't enough. Then he cut off the boy's genitals and put them in his bag. He dragged the body further inside and then, as if nothing had happened, went shopping to bring something tasty for his family.
Interestingly, by this time, Soviet law enforcement had actually connected several cases together and realized that a serial maniac was at work. In particular, it was about the murders in the Rostov region. They even detained suspects there who were quickly made out to be guilty. However, there was one problem. The guilty, or supposedly guilty, were in prison, but the murders, as you can easily guess, continued. Another important detail. Others couldn't add to the Rostov case, or rather they could, but they didn't really want to. Law enforcement at that time worked separately in different regions, not to mention in different republics of the Union. So, when suspicious murders happened in one city or another, they preferred to write them off as coincidences but didn't record them as a series. Or they'd dispose of the bodies entirely. With no body, there's no case. And if there is a case, someone has to take responsibility for it. And for this responsibility, if there's no result, you might get in trouble from above. So it was easier to just ignore it. That's exactly what they did.
This benefited the serial killer. After his initial arrest and party expulsion, Chikatilo killed 21 more people.
In 1985, when the investigation had no visible results, they decided to change the team.
The new people started checking whether similar attacks had occurred anywhere else besides the Rostov region. They began by analyzing all unsolved crimes in other regions. They started checking everyone previously convicted of rape, studying all mentally ill individuals prone to sexual crimes, and also reviewed materials from across the Union about missing persons. They collected over 50 cases matching the serial killer's pattern in total. By the way, an interesting fact. Back then, law enforcement didn't use the word maniac. They only said pervert. The word maniac entered the language right after the Chikatilo case. They conducted a pervert check among 10,000 people. They still couldn't find Chikatilo. In the process, investigators solved over 100 other crimes and imprisoned 56 people. I just hope they actually put the guilty ones in prison, and not like it sometimes happens with them. At that time, they also found out that the injuries of the girls and boys who were attacked were different. The attacker tore the boys' mouths, burned them with cigarettes, and there were many scratches found on their bodies. Some criminologists and psychiatrists even believed that two different maniacs were killing the boys and girls.
Soviet psychiatrists even tried to create a profile of the criminal, imagining themselves as profilers. But imagining yourself as a profiler and actually being one are still two different things. The specialists from the Institute of General and Forensic Psychiatry wrote in their report that the pervert, I quote, is stupid and that he cuts off the noses of his victims because it is a sign of hatred toward the enemy among representatives of Eastern nationalities. So basically, there's nothing useful in that report. The police also tried to catch the pervert, so to speak, using bait. Female police officers dressed in civilian clothes and walked around the places where the maniac had hunted or could hunt. But this didn't help either.
By the way, at that time, many people helped the investigation purely on a volunteer basis. In particular, you could sign up as an auxiliary police officer. Take a wild guess who was among these auxiliary officers. Yes, it was Andriy Chikatilo. He was helping the investigation catch himself. That is, he was constantly hanging around the police, staying one step ahead. However, every maniac, every criminal has their own end. More precisely, every maniac and criminal meets their own end. In short, Chikatilo was no exception. His last victim was a 22-year-old prostitute, Svetlana Korostik. On November 6, 1990, the serial killer led her into the forest near the railway station in the city of Zverevo, in the Rostov region, and came back alone, without Svetlana.
Only with a bag in his hands which contained knives and the severed breasts of the victim.
Near the station, a police officer stopped Chikatilo and asked him to show his documents. Then he let him go. But when the body was discovered days later, they began reviewing records of the on-duty officers at that location. Among the other recorded names was also the name Chikatilo. The police officer also remembered what the man looked like. He said that he looked innocent, elderly, but had a scratched face and dirt under his fingernails. Then the investigators checked whether this man had ever traveled on a business trip or vacation to Tashkent or Moscow, specifically when crimes occurred there. Andriy Chikatilo had been in the area, so they placed him under surveillance. The man went to the hospital for an x-ray of his finger. It was later discovered that one of the victims had broken his finger the previous day. And in the end, Chikatilo was arrested on November 20th, 1990, when he simply went out to the store for some beer. The man was detained for questioning, and for a long time, they couldn't get him to talk. But when the maniac realized he faced the death penalty, he started talking unprompted. However, he asked to be brought a psychiatrist claiming that everything he did was unconscious and that he needed treatment. They found him the only psychiatrist available at the time, just an ordinary one. But for Chikatilo, they introduced him to the best one, a real luminary in the field, and Chikatilo fell for it. Here's a quote. "You know, when I see a deserted place and find myself there with a victim, I get overcome by a terrible blackout. It only goes away when I cut the person, when I mutilate them, and afterwards it often starts to rain.
Chikatilo confessed to over 10 murders on the first day, and soon after he admitted to the rest.
Even about those, the investigators were unaware of.
In particular about his first victim, a 9-year-old girl for whose attack another innocent person was executed.
Have you ever thought about the torments in the afterlife and meeting your victims there? I haven't thought about that. Somehow I just haven't thought about it. I believe that all of that doesn't concern me. It just passed by my consciousness. I don't think about it.
As for my own torments, the torments I've endured, if I were to describe all my suffering, I've already gone through all the circles of hell. I've already been to the other side more than once. I already have. That's why, once again, I'm ready at any time. I've already come to terms with it. In my situation, people have always asked me, why didn't you hang yourself? Things like that. Even in court, they asked me, are you sure you didn't hang yourself? Well, of course, if I were an ordinary person, I should have drunk myself to death or hanged myself. But this is what happened to me. As professors write now, all these stresses, all this bullying, all this persecution. I was bullied my whole life. People wiped their feet on me. They never considered me a person anywhere.
In fact, the motives for which Chikatilo killed are still not exactly known, at least to this day. During his confessions, he always avoided the words, I killed. Instead, he used phrases like, I dealt with them, or I was not myself.
Chikatilo did his best to portray himself as insane.
He shouted at the judges, exposed his genitals, but in the end, he was still found sane.
No, I don't know such a person. Maybe you dream about one of them? No.
By the way, do you remember earlier it turned out that Chikatilo's DNA supposedly didn't match the attacker's DNA? So, Chikatilo was found to have blood type 2, and the attacker supposedly had blood type 4. But this fact is related to the analysis of blood and semen that were found on the victims' bodies. So, the expert who discovered this discrepancy wasn't saying that Chikatilo was a unique person. Supposedly, he experienced a phenomenon known as paradoxical ejaculation. This is when a person's blood is of one type, but their secretions are actually of another. However, that's just one version. There is another version which was voiced by a person who was directly involved in the Chikatilo case. This expert stated that the person who conducted the analysis made a mistake with the reagents, and she mistakenly recorded that Chikatilo had blood type 2. In reality, it's quite trivial. The blood and secretions of the maniac match, it's blood type 4.
After the confession to the murders, the trial began. The court considered the case from April to October of 1992. The maniac's verdict was read on October 14th and 15th. After that, he was sent to the death row cell to await execution by shooting.
Considering the crimes he committed, the judge cannot help but assign him the only punishment he deserves: to sentence him to death.
On February 14th, 1994, Chikatilo was executed in the Novocherkassk prison. He had the blood of 52 victims on his hands. 21 boys aged 7 to 16, 14 girls aged 9 to 17, and 17 older girls and women. He himself confessed to 55 murders, but 3 of those cases could not be confirmed. Well, my dears, if you've watched this video all the way to this very second, and that's quite something this time, then thank you, you're the best. Please take care of yourselves and your health. Extra content is available from 10 Ukrainian hryvnia a month. There are 7-8 videos with more to come, all for 10 Ukrainian hryvnia. Remember to watch this video and check out Ani's channel linked in the description. Thanks and see you. I love it.